In My Hero Academia Chapter 424, the series and all of its characters are changed forever. A few days after the final battle against All for One, there was a news broadcast in Washington. The meteorologist Meryl told their viewers that the entire country was currently benefiting from clear skies, which is absolutely insane. Deku's final smash was so strong that it totally negated one of the worst storms in history, affecting not just Japan, but a country on the other side of the planet. Meryl mentioned how the last week had been pretty crazy, and apologized for the inaccuracy of her previous forecast. At the same time, her producer was really hoping that she wouldn't say anything off script again. At the very least, she told them to be careful when leaving their laundry out to dry, since the wind was still rather strong. And again, this was all thanks to a single climactic punch from Deku. The #1 hero from Egypt, Salam, was assisting with Japan's reconstruction efforts. Cementos and Power Loader were doing their parts too. A little girl with the most adorable Endeavor bag possible, with her brother in tow, was delighted by what she saw. I'm pretty sure this bag is a reference to Horikoshi's ongoing joke of putting oversized eyes on his characters for some sketches and volume extras. Meryl promised that no matter what comes next for their world, she would continue to provide her forecasts. The little girl was happy to see that their house had already been rebuilt. Her brother compared it to the growth of bamboo, which is notoriously quick. This was a week after the final battle. Considering the looming threat and general collapse of society after the First War and the Battle of Jakku, the reconstruction project had only just begun. However, their progress thus far has been astounding. Once the war was over, heroes the world over, starting with the United States, poured into Japan to lend a helping hand. Singapore's top hero, Big Red Dot, spewed a torrent of water at a reporter as he spoke. Being forced to watch their fellow heroes fight tooth and nail while they were restricted behind sanctions was hard, so they were happy to help at all. Uraraka's dad actually benefited from the reconstruction project since it was an unprecedented amount of business. They received the plan from the inspection agency and were set to build according to the schematics, which were in line with the Building Standards Act. A 3D hero projected a mock-up of a building for them to use as a reference. The American hero Elect Plant was working alongside Setsuna and Reiko from Class 1B. As perched atop a support beam was an especially cool cameo. This is Koichi Himawari, the Skycrawler, the main character of the My Hero Academia Vigilante spin-off manga. With the sheer volume of characters Horikoshi has embraced from side stories, movies, and his previous works, it was only a matter of time before this guy showed up. On account of now being a US-based hero, it only makes sense for him to show up now rather than before. If this restoration effort were to happen before the advent of quirks, it would have taken longer than a decade. But thanks to the combined utility of their many quirks, the process has been accelerated tremendously. Elsewhere, Dr. Yoshi plainly admitted that things would not go back to how they previously were for his patient. We are taken to Central Hospital. And you know the author loves giving characters injuries when there are 5 different hospitals in this series, which is more than the number of canon hero schools we know about. Dr. Yoshi admitted to Bakugo and his parents that although the surgery helped, it would not get any better than this. They planned to observe his progress, but they'd already done all that they could to help him. They miraculously managed to maintain the shape of his arm, but there was no guarantee that it would ever move again, even after rehabilitation. The doctor suggested that if Dynamite still plans on becoming a hero, he should probably get prosthetics like Miruko's. After the First War, the bunny hero had no interest in a slow rehab-based recovery. But despite the suggestion, Bakugo refused. And that's because his quirk comes from the palm of his hand. Technically, it's a bit more than that these days, but that is the primary source. His parents had to hold back tears in the face of what could very well be a career-ending injury for their son. As he held on to the bandaged limb, Bakugo thought about how Deku didn't have a quirk to begin with. So he valiantly declared that he would crush it on the rehab, no matter how difficult it might be. But Dr. Yoshi caught him off guard when he made it clear that his patient still couldn't do any heavy lifting. The doctor was more worried about his heart than his hand. Without Edgeshot's efforts, Bakugo would have certainly died. The sheer fact that the young hero continued to fight after something like that was unbelievable. Not to mention the fact that he traveled all the way to Mount Fuji from the city after further wrecking his body against All for One. At the very least, Dr. Yoshi concluded that Bakugo's body refused to let him die. So for the time being, he needed to focus on getting the rest it needs. Sound logic that the bombastic hero could not argue with. In another hospital room, All Might wondered if his protege was awake. The two exhausted heroes had their beds side by side. Deku was surprised by the fact that they were sharing a room. All Might suspected that it must have been thanks to his friend Tsukauchi. That made sense to Deku. It would be far easier to protect both of them in such close proximity. And with the sheer number of injured heroes, there were only so many available rooms. Deku wondered about his teacher's condition. Apparently, All Might's doctor had never seen so many bolts. He then asked Deku the same thing. Thankfully, Deku was beginning to feel his arms again, yet he remained a bit solemn. He mentioned how, in the end, he couldn't save Tenko's life like he had hoped. Even after he reached him and got rid of his hatred, Tenko remained the leader of the League of Villains until the very end. Considering he also had a near-death experience of his own, All Might wondered what Shigaraki's face looked like in his final moments. Deku remembered telling the man that he already destroyed it. To that, Shigaraki responded that it would all depend on what the heroes do from now on. Then, with a smile, he too told Deku to do his best. I'm glad we got a bit more from Shigaraki's conclusion. But Deku didn't actually say anything about it. All Might told Deku that if what he saw wasn't a crying child, then he believed the villain's heart truly was saved, just like the ultimate mission of One for All. Now, all of their souls can finally rest in peace. All Might wondered if Deku passed the power onto Shigaraki. If so, he believed it must have reached him. At the time, he could feel the transfer through his lingering connection to the power. Deku admitted that he did, but he could still feel some of the embers inside himself. And that's when Bakugo abruptly entered the room, much to the dismay of his worried parents. Bakugo remained motionless by the doorframe as his mother continued to panic. Deku was really happy to see that his friend was safe. Bakugo's parents profusely apologized to both heroes and claimed that their son was just worried about them. Bakugo was overwhelmed by the mention of embers. He realized what that would mean for Deku's future as a hero. He thought of their shared enthusiasm and dream of becoming the greatest. He struggled to ask if this meant Deku would be quirkless. Deku continued to smile as he confirmed it. But since he was quirkless from the beginning, he wasn't really sad. He chose to transfer it to Shigaraki. Ultimately, he was just happy he had the chance to live his dream at all. The focus was brought to Bakugo's ruined arm. He thought about his reaction to Deku's entry into UA despite the presumed limitations of a quirkless person. He was too stunned to move. He remembered his fight against Deku, where his rival promised to go even higher. He remembered telling Deku not to let him surpass him during the final moments of their last fight. And Bakugo wept. The revelation was too much to bear. Deku's available eyes shot out of his head in disbelief at the sight. Bakugo stammered as he fought against the wave of emotions. He wondered aloud about how he'd been treating Deku for all this time. He kept wiping away the flood of tears as he admitted his belief that they would compete with each other for far longer. He was a wreck. Deku smiled and told him not to cry since it wasn't like him. He tried to point to the silver lining that he still has the embers. With that being said, his body was pretty messed up and his mental state was in rough shape too. All Might then recognized their strength. He mentioned how they had both changed so much since the day he met them. Bakugo's parents stepped out of the room to allow them the moment. All Might told Deku that when he ran off to save Bakugo, he became the #1 hero's greatest hero. But now, he was someone who could make people stand up again. He was now the greatest hero to everyone. This made Deku begin to cry too. Then the symbol of peace turned to Bakugo. It was thanks to his efforts that All Might was even alive to say any of this. To him, Bakugo was also the greatest hero. He couldn't thank them enough. We would then see Deku and Bakugo smile beyond the tears. An older Deku recounted these moments from his childhood. At the time, he believed peace would return immediately after the end of the war. Then we would see Shoto and Uraraka, fellow young heroes who had climactic battles of their own that were especially emotional. The pain and trauma from which must be immense. Their story isn't over just yet. Not until they make it to the bright future they've all been aspiring towards. Previously, with chapter 377, we saw the hand of an old man grasp at the sakura blossoms of a new spring as he narrated the events of the war. This new information backs up the idea that this is Deku. So if it wasn't already assumed, we can probably expect a time skip at the very end, one that goes very far into the future. We then see Deku's new facial scars and hairstyle. As he and his classmates approach their school in the midst of its reconstruction, they must resolve themselves to go beyond, as a new everyday life awaits them all. This, my friends, is the epilogue. So, it looks like My Hero Academia isn't over just yet. Horikoshi's author comment actually sheds a bit more light on our current situation. Quote, "Writing conventions say that the conclusion of a story should be short, but this is not the type of manga that can immediately end after the fighting is done, so I'll keep going for a little while. We're going back to the title." Yeah, not sure what he was thinking when he said the story would be over in about a year, a few years ago, but whatever. We are getting back to the academia. And My Hero Academia has always been a series with a mixed identity. Battle shonen on one hand, slice of life on the other. Since My Villain Academia, it has leaned towards the battle stuff pretty heavily. And for those who really enjoy the more domestic character interaction driven elements, there can at times be a sense of alienation. In fact, from my experience, it seems as though there are far more fans who favor the school stuff. So I can definitely understand where Horikoshi is coming from on that front. With that being said, I am very curious to see how much longer this series will go on for with that in mind. A part of me longs for a solid conclusion, while another is too attached to these characters and this story to so easily let it go. But all good things come to an end. Based on a lot of your comments, I'm pretty sure that many of you who have been with the channel for a while favor the battle content, so let me know how you feel about this shifted direction. And if you prefer this approach, or have no preference either way, tell us what you're hoping to see. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku, thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.